Hey folks, what's up? Welcome back to another Master video. So to finish off last month's tier list videos, right? Let's wrap it up with the strikers, right? Again, like I mentioned before, this is just we're catching up the last month's stuff, and it's not going to include anything from this month, right? Because not everything has been released this month, right? We still have obviously Diantha and Iris not out yet, and then Cyrus still has to get its grid. And like I mentioned before, I generally do like to want to use them a bit before evaluating them further. So we're just gonna catch up on last month's stuff, and then in say 2 weeks or so, 2-3 weeks, once those two come out, we had a bit of a feel for them, and then we could sort of evaluate them even further. So, anyways, as usual, shout out to Runner and Prof and Sonia and folks for helping me out on these. As usual, had a lot of disagreements, but it's fine. It's fine. And as always, tier lists, they're incredibly subjective, right? So if you disagree, it's fine, whatever. I don't really care. So a few things that we are mostly evaluating on, again, a lot of the emphasis, right, is put on how well they do in master mode, because I do think that is quite important, because that is probably, again, the hardest mode that we have in the game at the moment. And there are some other things that we take into factor that some people might not take into factor when evaluating units. One big thing actually is their team composition, what teams you can run them in, what supports are available to them, and do they have the capacity to run say like a double or triple striker team that could, we're just looking at how much in terms of damage output that they could throw out there, because these are strikers, remember. How much damage output they could put out there, how sustainable those are, because you can't just throw like 3 strikers and like have no one to tank, and then that's sure, you're gonna do a lot of damage in like 2 turns, and then your team's gonna get wiped on the 3rd turn, right? So again, a lot of factors in here. Team composition, usability, all that stuff, right? We are going to obviously take into factor their 6-star EXs if they have any. If they don't, then not taking that into factor. Just stuff that's in the game at the moment, right? And all that stuff. So let's get into this. So as usual, I do like to throw in just the one of each tier, so we kind of know what the standards are, right? So starting from the top, by the way, we did switch a new one over here, made by actually Prof, right, with the global link sprites instead of the in-game ones. So that's why it looks like this, right? So anyways, so starting from the top tier, I guess a pretty shining example of the top tier is just Metagross, right? Metagross is a very interesting striker. Like his damage output is actually not that great. I mean, it's not like terrible, but it's like his damage output is actually pretty average. But he's just incredibly powerful with the incredibly high chance to flinch on Ironhead aggravation, recuperation to heal back up himself, solid defenses, all that stuff, and then Haymaker, nice sync nuke, all those things. He's like the auto god of Legendary Arena, right? You just throw him in like on any team with a solid tank, and then click auto, and then you just beat the stage without even needing to do anything, right? So obviously Metagross still has to be up there. And here's the crazy thing, because when we were evaluating a lot of these strikers, honestly, one like interesting thing that like everyone pointed out was that strikers kind of are underwhelming overall as like a group, right? Because like if you look at like the numbers that like a lot of these techs are outputting, like the strikers just don't get close to that, right? And in this day and age. So and most strikers, 90% of them only just do damage, and if they're not good at doing damage, they're just in a really tough spot right now, right? And and it's funny because one of the best strikers in the game, Steven Metagross, is up there not because he does the most damage, it's because he does like a lot of tech-ish things, right? Which is super super funny, right? So, anyways, yeah, we'll put Metagross up there. So moving on to the next tier, the I guess sub top tier, whatever you want to call it. We could put, let's say, what's a good example? Gyarados. Gyarados is a pretty good example, right? Gyarados, fantastic damage and Hyper Beam, all that stuff. Gyarados is, in my opinion, like slightly overlooked. Just because like not a lot of people pulled for him, I believe. At least just from my experience talking to people, right? But he's just really solid, right? It's a Hyper Beam user. Hyper Beam users are always good just because Hyper Beam just does so much damage, right? You got solid move gauge refreshes on Hyper Beam. You got some okayish multipliers with racing or not racing rain, raging rain and stuff, right? That you could also have. Carry on is always nice. Paralysis synergy is something, right? Not that you necessarily want to pick it up, but yeah, it's just a great overall unit. Got Potion, which is always good. Powerflux 5, obviously, that's the other great multiplier that it has. It's just a really solid, good striker, right? Moving on to high tier, I think something we could probably put in that would be, let's say Typhlosion, right? Solid fire AoE damage, good heals, is actually relatively fast as well, right? That is something that I do feel is pretty underrated on Typhlosion. In my opinion, it's just its speed is actually really, really, really good. You can run it decently in like some Sun teams with like dual strikers, right? With Meganium, 377 speed, right? And then Soak the Fire also gives you some speed as well. And then you got Speeding Sun. Like, this is a prime candidate for like a dual striker option for Sun teams. So that's really, really nice as well, right? So all right, there's that. Moving on to the still solid tier. I was about to put Leavanny in there. You know what? Let's put Leavanny here. Leavanny is honestly, in my opinion, kind of in between high tier and still solid, because Leavanny has like some really, really great similarities with Typhlosion, which is why I was like hesitating, because I don't think Leavanny is like that great of an example of this tier, because it's probably the best out of this tier. Like, as Smarty Pants, which is pretty cool, right? You got Double on a Roll on Bug Buzz. You got the Solar Flare 5, the sync move. And then you got Charging Sun 5. And then like really, really good speed with like speed buffs, right? You got some defense buffs, all that stuff. Speeding Sun over here, right? And then more on a roll, swag bag, all that stuff. Honestly, Leavanny, it's like top still solid tier and like low high tier, something like that in between. It's I think Leavanny's pretty underrated, honestly. Anyways, moving on to the next tier. I'd say a good example would be something like where's Reuniclus. Reuniclus is a good one, right? Reuniclus, honestly, nowadays, like people used to say, oh, Reuniclus, it's a striker that could also, or is a tank that could also do some damage. And honestly, nowadays, it seems more like a striker that could tank some hits more than a tank that could do some damage. Because, like, Reuniclus, again, I'm not saying, like, it's terrible for a tank, but let's see. You could still use it as a tank if you want, but, like this just isn't like that great anymore. Like, I mean, the stats never were great for its tank. The big thing about its tanking was like the heals. That is a lot of heals. But like now, there's just much better tanks out there, honestly. So it's more, in my opinion, you should probably just use Reuniclus more as like a striker than a tank, right? That could do some solid psych type damage, right? Which is pretty nice. Moving on into like say mostly Outclassed. I think a really great example of this could be, say, let's say Rayquaza. Rayquaza has Outrage, Draco Meteor. Unfortunately, in terms of Draco Meteor, Kingdra does it better, right? In terms of Outrage, Haxorus does it better. Zekrom does it better, right? It just unfortunately gets outclassed, right? Air Release. Kidding. All right. Hopefully it gets a grid soon. It's going to be fantastic, right? Hopefully. And then moving on to the completely outclassed part, we could throw in something like, I don't know. Let's say Machamp, right? Lucario's straight up better. Wally's so much better, right? But it's a gimmicky unit that's it's fun to use, but the outcome is just not that great, unfortunately. Need too much support to get like mediocre return on results, right? So, anyways, moving on. Let's just go from left to right now. Then I guess. Lysar we could put in an A, right? It has heals on Oblivion Wing, has flinch on Dark Pulse, right? Has a lot of HP. It's like a mini Steven, except its damage is just not as consistent enough, because if you're switching between using Oblivion Wing and using Dark Pulse, you're losing out on a lot of super effective damage, which kind of sucks for Yveltal, unfortunately. But outside of that, you got some really, really great stuff that is pretty similar to what Steven does, right? Moving on, we got Mullane. Mullane is unfortunately completely outclassed. Honestly, Solgaleo's better. Steven is obviously better, right? Gloria's better. Steel type physical striker. There's just almost like no place for Mullane, unfortunately. Moving on, we got Drifblim. Drifblim, we could probably put in still solid tier, right? Donberry does help out Drifblim a lot, makes a Shadow Ball Sync Nuke Drifblim build much more viable, which is actually not a terrible option, right? Unfortunately, Phantom Force still has like the really, really bad issue with the sync move countdown thing, especially if you're trying to run like a Sync Nuke grid with Drifblim, right? But I do think Donberry helps out Drifblim quite a bit here. Moving on, Avalog, man. Honestly, Avalog is nowhere as good as like Mullane and Machamp. But I don't want to create too many tiers. But yeah, Avalog's just not that great, unfortunately. Conkeldurr, I actually like both Conkeldurr and Machamp's kit. I think they're all pretty interesting, but numbers are numbers. They're just not that great, unfortunately. Moving on, Charizard's still pretty good, right? With the obviously the pretty high, relatively high now. I mean, it's still really high damage output that it has, right? The +6 speed that it gets on the training move is really, really nice as well. Rejuvenate is nice, right? So yeah, there's that. For Alligator, put it in the mid tier. I think Feraligatr is honestly criminally underrated. Obviously Feraligatr is not anything special. It's not like crazy or whatever, right? But like people like talk about Feraligatr like it's the worst unit, like worst striker in the game. It's nowhere near the worst striker in the game. Like all of these are easily worse than Feraligatr, right? Even some other like stuff like Guzma, which is we could still put in this tier, right? Guzma, where's Braviary? It takes me a minute to find these with these new icons, but yeah, like Guzma. Did I just not bring it, Braviary? Poor thing. There it is. Guzma, Braviary, like these are easily worse than Feraligatr. The reason why people think Feraligatr is worse than Feraligatr actually is, I think, is just because water types are so saturated, right? There's just so many much better water types that, like, in terms of if it's worth using Feraligatr over those, obviously it's not. But as a standalone unit, right, if you're just looking Feraligatr by itself, Feraligatr is still, it's still pretty solid, honestly, right? The damage outputs, like, it's again, it's not anything crazy, but it's still pretty solid with the Haymaker Sync Nuke and all that stuff, right? I really don't think it's as bad as people think it is. Again, it's not great. It's not great at all. But it's not like the worst striker in the game, like a lot of people say it is. Moving on, Garchomp. Oh God. You know what? I don't want to talk about Garchomp right now. Let's talk about Garchomp later. All right, Gallade. Let's put Gallade's still really, really good, right? Obviously, the damage output for Gallade is insane. The mechanics for Gallade is very, very, very fun and interesting and powerful, right? So got some of the best multipliers in the game. So there you go, right? Gallade. Also the sync for Gallade, if you want to run it with like something like a Whimsicott or something, for Cakewalk, you could do that too as well, right? Moving on, Emboar. Emboar, we could still put it here. I don't really like Emboar as much as other people are as high on Emboar. I'm not as high on Emboar. I would concede that the potions are still very, 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 very nice on Emboar, but outside of that, honestly, Emboar's damage is kind of mid. A bit slow. Obviously, you can fix that a bit with Flame Charge, but it's not gonna make it anything crazy. But I don't know. Emboar's okay, right? Emboar's okay. Moving on, we got Barry. You get Barry in the still solid part. Like obviously, fantastic sync nuke, all that stuff. It's just unfortunately the Bubble Beam these don't do really good, and Barry does have a pretty bad team composition issue. The team comps that Barry's is in are kind of not good. Right? It does sometimes have a hard time there, right? Especially if you're running it with like May, then okay, if you're running May, there's 0 point in running Barry. Like you should probably run like Misty over Barry, right? So Barry does have like some team composition issues, but overall pretty solid, right? Moving on, we got Haxorus. Put in mid. I mean, the mechanics are still fun, right? It's still okay-ish in Battle Villa. Although, honestly, there's just so many better units than Haxorus now for Battle Villa. But it's still fine, right? It's just that its damage output is just not impressive at all anymore. In comparison to, like, some of the other stuff that we've been getting. So, it's still okay, but it's not anything crazy. Mudstill, I mean, it's whatever. Houndoom's this. Okay, Houndoom's another one that we kind of downgraded a bit. Houndoom, like Barry, has some severe team composition issues, right? Because a lot of times, for example, if we're looking at like a lot of like the dark type strikers, or dark type damage deals, doesn't have to be strikers, right? Stuff like Mightyena or Lysander and all that stuff. They're just so much easier to like run them in like dual dark striker territory. Like even if we're like talking about Marnie, which we're not, right? But it's just so much easier to run them together in like a dual striker composition. And it's just not that great to run Houndoom in a dual striker composition, because if you're running Houndoom dual striker, right, a lot of times it's going to be slightly hard to get both of your multipliers up, or all three of the multipliers up, which if you don't have the multipliers up, Houndoom's damage is not that crazy. But obviously if you do, it's really, really good. But then if you do have all of them up, you're losing a lot of damage output from a potential secondary striker that you could have put there. But Houndoom still does really, really good damage, right? But we are slightly going to downgrade this one a bit. A lot of people say, oh, Houndoom's bad now. Is Houndoom bad? No, Houndoom's not bad. Houndoom's still very, 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 very good, right? It just has some team composition issues. Maybe in the future, if we do get a really, really great support that could activate all the Houndoom multipliers, as well as support a Houndoom plus secondary dark type striker comp, then we could definitely move Houndoom back up a bit. Moving on, Lucario, probably mid, right? Lucario, to get an EX, which is cool, but the EX is like probably one of the worst in the game, unfortunately. Its damage output is okay. It's not anything crazy. It's okay, I guess. Kingdra is another one that I kind of downgraded. Kingdra does have, again, also severe team composition issues. To get like its maximum damage output is very, very difficult. And if you're not getting your maximum damage output out of your multipliers, Kingdra's damage is kind of mid as well, right? Which is why it's a mid. So there you go. Zekrom, we could put it in sub-top tier, right? Does have some team composition issues. Once Hilbert gets the Synchro, Synchro expanded, honestly, Hilbert's Synchro expansion would help Zekrom a lot, right? And like a Zekrom plus, a Volkner sort of team comp, that could be really, really, really nice, right? If you run those three together. But at the moment, I mean, even with Hilbert, it's it's okay. It's okay. Good damage. Good damage. A bit slow. Nothing else really to talk about for Zekrom, I guess. Mewtwo, it's solid, right? Bianca saved Mewtwo, right? Psychic Train makes the Psychic on Mewtwo actually really really good. So there's that. Also sells the Shadow Ball for another type coverage. Although Mewtwo Shadow Ball is really really bad, but it's an option, right? Especially if you're running like Villa or something. That's nice. But overall, it's just kind of right? Moving on, I got Jigglypuff. Jigglypuff, we could put in still solid. Jigglypuff has a really, really nice team comp, right? You could run it. Well, you can run it. It's very, 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 very much recommend to run it with Delphox, and that's a very devastating team comp. Jigglypuff's damage cap it used to be really, really good when it first came out, but it did get like outgrown now, right? In terms of like fairy type damage healers, you definitely would want to use Whimsicott over Jigglypuff in like almost all scenarios. Right, so there's that, unless you just want to like completely cheese a stage with Jigglypuff and Delphox, right? But it's still good, it's still solid, right? Moving on, Palkia. Again, this is pre-synchroned expansion, so we're gonna put it in mid, right? Again, just solid Hydro Pump damage, all that stuff. Dragon type damage on Palkia is really really bad. But once it gets synchroned expanded, honestly, again, we're not doing that right now. This is a non-expanded version of Palkia. But once it does get its synchroned expanded, I can honestly easily see it in sub-top tier, right? Because like if you look at its damage numbers, right, like after synchroned expansion, Palkia has red blast burn levels of damage on Hydro Pump. And that's pretty crazy. That's pretty crazy. One of the top, damage dealing strikers in the game. Obviously, you can't compete with some of the other techs and stuff, but like in terms of like strikers damage wise, like it's all the way up there, right? Which is pretty crazy. But at the moment, without the synchroned expanded, it's still right. Moving on, Pidgeot's still really really good. Nice speed, good defenses, right? Good damage on Hurricane. Although max damage is kind of hard to get. But if you run this with like a Togekiss or something, that could actually be really, really nice, since the sync move on Pidgeot's kind of bad, right? So you can have like Togekiss sync for you instead after you Mega, because you do have to Mega first, which does slightly suck in that scenario. But Pidgeot's, it's still pretty nice, right? Clawitzer we could put down here. It doesn't really do anything, honestly. 2-gauge move. Again, it has some really, really interesting mechanics that I actually love, but like it's just gets capped, unfortunately, by the low BP that it has. Ice Steven's kind of weird. I had some arguments over it, but it still kept it in the top tier. Obviously, Hail on Sync is really, really good. Ice Steven does lack some like better partners. Obviously, Pheromosa is amazing. Dugong's not terrible either, but like unlike like Metagross or say Charizard or whatever, right? Or like Volcarona, we don't really have like that really great of a partner with Steven. But the great thing about Steven is, or Ice Steven, right? Is that like Ice Steven, like the team comp works seamlessly, right? If you're running like a Delibird, Ice Steven, and say either a Pheromosa or Dugong, like they fit incredibly well together. They're super easy like to run together, right? Instead of like with some of these other units, you do have some awkwardness that you have to figure out. But with Ice Steven, like it's a really nice put together team. On top of that, again, it does have flinches, which is nice. You can freeze if you want. The other one downside about Steven that or Ice Steven that I'm not liking either is the damage is not incredibly high. I mean, it's not terrible. It's kind of like Metagross, except Metagross just does so much more, right? I definitely do think Metagross is better at this point. But Ice Steven's still really, really good, right? So moving on, Mismagius, I put in still solid, right? Pretty good Shadow Ball, I guess. Good multipliers, all that stuff. The damage cap is kind of low, but it's a decent damage dealer, right, overall. Moving on, Sceptile, we could still put it up here. Really good damage, right? Solid sync nuke, all that stuff. Relatively easy to set up. Yeah, I don't know. It's pretty good. Hilbert's another like borderline top tier, sub top tier. Putting it sub top tier. Like Marina by himself isn't like anything crazy, right? The big thing about like Marina, it's not as much of a like single like wrecking ball than it is a much more of a facilitator. Mighty is probably one of the best facilitators in the game for like strikers, right? As of like maybe Ice Steven. But because like not only does it have like on roll on crunch to decrease the opponent's defenses or teammates could do more damage, but also has like spur on, which like charges your gauge every time you beat something up. Very low maintenance as well, right? With stuff like carry on, all that stuff. Has a solid sync nuke option, so if you want to use that, you could go for that, right? It's just a really, really, really great like in between piece that you could run in like a lot of great dual striker scenarios. So that's really, really cool, right? Moving on, Infernape probably in the mid. I guess like Fire Blast still does like okayish damage. Like Infernape's damage is fine. Like the big issue with Infernape is it's one of like the most frail strikers in the game. It's incredibly frail, unfortunately. And like the damage that it does doesn't really make up for it, honestly. But it's still okay, I guess. Moving on, Dugong, I kind of want to move it up a bit, although again the damage cap isn't anything crazy, but it has like some of like the best multipliers in the game. Solid special defense, all that stuff. It's okay, right? Icy Wind, decreased speed is nice. Yeah, it's good. Anyways, Dragonite, still up here, obviously. Hyper Beam, incredible amounts of damage. Potions always really, really great to use, right? Yeah, it's one of the top damage dealers in the game that doesn't rely on terrain or weather, right? Moving on, Pikachu. Could put it in mid, I guess. Used to be really good because of potions. Not that much anymore. There's just so many much better potion users. And damage isn't anything crazy, right? Moving on, Kamo could still have it in sub-top tier, right, I guess. Its damage is pretty low, unfortunately. It does have a really... I really love using Kamo. It's a really fun gimmick. Obviously with high 5 on sync, all that stuff. You could use for sync countdown sometimes if you play it, you know, if you pick something like a half HP at start, that could be pretty fun. But yeah, it does get slightly it does have like really, really slow speed, being a 4-gauge move user, and the overall damage is just slightly on the lower side, right? Pheromosa, probably in the high tier, right? Obviously it's a very, very great option Pokemon, right? You could run it against Ice Week, run it against Bug Week. People always joke about like how bad his defenses are. Honestly, they're really not that bad. If you know how to play with Pheromosa, the defenses aren't an issue at all. But in my opinion, the issue with Pheromosa is more so like its damage. I think Pheromosa's damage is slightly overrated. Unless you pick like PR5, but like no one PR5's not that great. But yeah, I do think that the damage is slightly overrated. However, the biggest thing for Pheromosa is obviously it's going to be on dual striker teams, right? It's built to be on dual striker teams. Insane speed, the move gauge refresh, all that stuff, and then the also like the way that Pheromosa could get her own stat buffs easily by knocking out opponents, all that stuff. So yeah, it's still really, really good. Moving on. Lycanroc probably in here as well. Unfortunately, Lycanroc's damage is not incredible. And it's too much of a hassle to get minimal amounts of like return, right? Unfortunately. Yeah, I mean, it still does solid damage. It's just not anything crazy. And the setup is really awkward. It's just not really worth it. So hopefully we do get like some better rock type striker in the future, or like a really, really good like sand unit that could really help bring Lycanroc to the next level. Something like a May or something. like a Sand May. But at the moment, unfortunately, Lycanroc is just not. It's just not there, right? Chandelure's okay, I guess. His damage is fine. The gimmick is kind of awkward. But that's okay-ish damage. Pinsir's kind of whatever. I mean, we're not game press. We could just put it down here. Scolopede's okay. Okay-ish damage, all that stuff. Okay, we'll talk about Garchomp. Alright. If you guys have been following channel, all that stuff, you know that, like, we used to always put Garchomp all the way up here, right? And deservedly so, right? However, unfortunately, Garchomp just has been outclassed, nowadays. Like, if you look at a lot of the units in sub-top tier, they do as much damage, in some instances, even more damage than Garchomp, has better mechanics, and most importantly, the biggest thing about Garchomp is have better teams. Garchomp's team is just not good enough if you compare it to like a lot of the other units in like top tier or some of the units even in sub top tier. Garchomp just does not have a good enough partner. Maybe in the future, if say we get like a great Dust Kicker unit, again like a sand version of May, that could definitely make Garchomp much better. But unfortunately at the moment it's just not there. The damage, again, while still being really good, is just not good enough to be all the way up there, with all the limitations that it does have. Again, team comp for Garchomp is just not there, right? Because you have to run Ace Roll. If you have to run Ace Roll, then you have one more spot left. You either go with a tank, right? Which in that case, just in comparison to like any other of these units, like you just can't compare their damage output, right? If you're running like another tank over there. And if you're not running a tank, if you're running like a striker like a Lycanroc or something, which is actually a pretty nice setup, right? But if you are running something like a Lycanroc or something like a Sand Shelter, you just have to tank with Garchomp, and Garchomp, while not being terrible for a striker in terms of tank, is just nowhere as good as if you're running like a dual striker with something like a Singsu Blue as your tank instead. Obviously, Singsu Blue, much better tank than Garchomp. As much as it pains me, absolutely pains me to do this, because I'm a huge Cynthia fan. I love Garchomp and all that stuff. And please, all the Cynthia fans out there, please understand. Dude, I do not. I swear to God, I am rooting for Garchomp. I am rooting for Cynthia. I hope she comes back in the future with a epic comeback revenge game sometime when we do get a really good partner for Garchomp. But at the moment, unfortunately, as much as it pains me again to say this, she is definitely not up there anymore. It's just the units that have been coming out just kind of just show how much more Cynthia needs to be on that level, but she's still really good. She's probably top 3 in like this tier or something, so she's still good. She's still easily the best ground type striker in the game, since we have like only 2. But yeah, again, hopefully she gets better in the future, because like a lot of these units, like people think, units that are released, they're not gonna like move up or down. No, units that are released could easily still move up or down depending on what units that get released in the future, because the big thing about Pokemon Masters is it's a team game, which annoys the hell out of me when people talk about, oh, well, this unit has completely self-sustainability. It could buff its stuff to the max. It doesn't need whatever. Yeah, who cares? Bring in supports. It's a 3 unit like team composition. It's a team game, which is why, again, team composition is something that we take in a lot into account, especially in this rendition of the list, right? So yeah, hopefully, again, like even if you're like a fan of, I don't know, like Reuniclus, well, maybe not Reuniclus, like something like I don't know, like Kingdra or something. If you love Claire in the future, maybe there could be something that could make Claire even better, right? Maybe in the future we get a fantastic rain unit with paralysis and all that stuff. That's really fast. Like maybe in the future we get something like that, and then Kingdra could be much better, right? So unit could still like move up depending on what we get in the future, all that stuff. But again, please don't kill me. folks, over this. I really didn't want to do this. I really did not want to do this, swear to God, but I can't in good conscience have her up there anymore. Anyways, moving on. Beedrill, it's whatever, right? Same thing with Rampardos. One hit wonder, right, before it hits itself to the Shadow Realm. How's okay. We could put in like it's still solid tier. The inertia, like the sync nuke on how's actually pretty good. Also really good speed, all that stuff. Unfortunately, discharges damage is just kind of right. It's actually pretty low in today's standards, but it does have a really good sync nuke, right? Moving on, Sharpedo, we could probably still put it up here. Obviously, very fast. One of the top partners for May, right, which is insane. Although when Cyrus gets its grid expanded, maybe Sharpedo loses that role. But really good damage, defense debuffs, all that stuff. It's kind of like Mightyena, right? Except, actually, you know what? Yeah, these two are really comparable, right? Like these two are like borderline. But yeah, up there as well, right? So moving on, Sylveon, unfortunately, not in the top of this list, but is definitely in the top of the list of in contention for probably the weakest striker in the game, unfortunately. I don't know. Hopefully the grid saves it, but at the moment it's pretty not good. Arbok, it doesn't really do much. Alder's interesting. Alder's one that we promoted over here into the top tier. Alder is actually fantastic. In the modern day of the meta, right? Obviously, fantastic speed, plus 6 speed, rejuvenate, hybrid beam that hits like a truck, right? The struggle bug also hits very hard as well. Has fantastic team comps that you could run it with, right? Like Alder, Pheromosa, Alderberg. Those are really powerful comps that you could go with. That work out very well. Alder's kind of insane, right? at this point. So that is definitely one that we promoted over here. It basically has everything. I guess like the defenses aren't like the greatest because it does like decrease its defenses a bit, but like outside of that, Alder does kind of like remind me of like Singsu Red a bit, right? Except I guess it's kind of like Singsu Red, but like slightly more versatile with I think a lower damage cap, right? Although actually I don't know. Let me see. Yeah, it does have a lower damage cap, but it's really nice. But yeah, it's just a more versatile red that does a bit less damage, right? Moving on, Solgaleo. You put it here, I guess. Sunstone Strike is a fantastic move. Focus Blast does some really good damage, but that's kind of, I mean, it has really great stats all around, in my opinion. But it does, it does struggle a bit with competing with like better Steel type or Fighting type strikers, right? Moving on, Salzal is pretty nice. Damage is okay. I mean, the Toxic Flinch thing is fun. It's cool, I guess. I mean, the damage is actually one of like the lower ones, but it does have a good mechanic. It's pretty fast, right? So there's that. Moving on, Tyranitar, unfortunately down here as well. I love Tyranitar. I almost bought like a really expensive Tyranitar statue the other day. As a huge Tyranitar fan, unfortunately, not that great at the moment. Zacian, sub top tier as well. It's kind of like an Alder-ish unit or Luzamine-ish unit, except doesn't do as much damage as Alder, I guess. Also just overall all around not as good as Alder. But very fast, has like a billion move gauge refreshes, right? The one big downside for Zacian is you do have to wait for the opponent to sink before you can rack up your damage numbers. And that does kind of suck. I mean, in Master Mode, I guess you could like pick the sync move countdown thing for your opponent if you really want that, but like overall, it does have like some issues over here. Obviously, it also has a double coverage move with Play Rough, and if you run like Zacian with like Metagross with like a good speed buffing unit, that's gonna be a really nice comp, right? Moving on, Zebstrika's still fantastic. Not there. It's still in the high tier, right? The nice sync nuke. Wild Charge does amazing damage, right? All that stuff, very fast. has heals, all that stuff. So it's really really nice, right? Ho we could still probably still put it in still solid, right? Anything with Solar Rise is gonna be really nice. Solar Rise is fantastic, and people do sleep on Ho's damage quite a bit. Ho's damage actually really really decent. And it's just overall, I don't know, it's great, especially with now with the updated thing. Not that we take that into account. We're all assessing everyone at the same platform here. 5 out of 5 2020, right? In terms of looking at numbers, all that stuff. But yeah, it's really nice. Got dual coverage, 100 or not a 50% chance to burn. Great damage on overheat, all that, right? Moving on. All right, these two are here. Slacking also in contention for probably the weakest striker in the game, unfortunately. I love Norman. I'm a huge Norman fan. I like Slacking too, but unfortunately not that great. And is probably leading that category in like the worst striker in the game. And then you got Solrock, which has a good... It does okayish damage on the sync move, but like outside of that, just does like almost nothing. So anyways, there you go, folks. Argue amongst yourselves in the comments, have fun. And yeah, anyways, that's gonna be this one. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me guys think in the comments down below. Like and enjoy this video, so our channel for some more Pokemon content. I'll see you guys in the next one.